I have lived long enough to know that people forget far more easily than buildings do. This isn't the kind of poetic exaggeration tourists enjoy when they wander through historic neighborhoods with cameras in their hands. It's something quieter and far more unsettling. Old houses listen. They absorb. They remember every careless footstep, every raised voice, every secret spoken when the speaker believed no one else was paying attention. Anyone who has ever spent a night inside a true Philadelphia brownstone understands this instinctively. The floorboards don't creak because they're weak. They sigh because they're tired. The windows groan not from loose frames, but from decades of conversations with wind and rain. Even the silence feels deliberate, as if the walls are holding their breath. My name is Ariadne Kimbrough. Everyone calls me Addie. I'm 68 years old, and I live alone in one of those brownstones, tucked between newer buildings that don't know how to listen anymore. People often assume I own the house. I don't correct them, but the truth is simpler and heavier. You don't own places like this. You look after them until it's your turn to leave. For 20 years, I worked in document classification at the National Archives. I made a career out of untangling chaos, of taking fragmented lives and reducing them to orderly files. That kind of work teaches you something important. Disorder is rarely accidental. Someone almost always benefits when things remain confusing. The house suited me, beeswax polish on the banister, the faint scent of dried herbs hanging in the pantry, old paper, ink, and wood warmed by afternoon sun. Everything had a place. Everything could be traced back to its origin. The past, when respected, is not frightening. My son never agreed. To Kalen, the house was a burden pretending to be history. Every visit followed the same routine. He'd step inside, wrinkle his nose as if offended by the air itself, and pace the living room without touching a thing. "Mom, this place is a disaster waiting to happen," he'd say. "You could sell this property tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of your life." Comfortable meant something modern. Clean lines, white walls, stainless steel. No creaks, no shadows, no reminders of where he came from. I rarely responded. Silence unsettles people like Kalen. They mistake it for weakness. But over the past year, his visits changed. He called more often, too often. His voice carried urgency instead of annoyance. His wife, Danica, who had spent years barely acknowledging my existence, suddenly became attentive. Did my knees hurt? Was climbing the stairs difficult? Had I ever felt dizzy? Concern, I learned long ago, is an excellent disguise. The staircase became their focus. The main staircase was the heart of the house, wide oak steps leading to the second floor, worn smooth by generations. Recently, one step near the top had begun to groan under my weight. "You're going to fall," Kalen said one afternoon, a little too eagerly. "Let me hire a crew and fix it properly." "No metal," I told him. "Only wood, and only Jackson." Jackson was a local carpenter who still believed in doing things the right way. Quiet, steady, a man whose conscience mattered more than contracts. He arrived one calm morning while I worked upstairs, cataloging documents from 1912. Sunlight spilled across my desk. The house felt peaceful. Too peaceful. Then Jackson called my name. "Addie," he said, and his voice was wrong. Strained, controlled. "Please don't move, don't step on the stairs." I walked to the railing and looked down. Jackson stood frozen on the lower steps, his face pale, his hands shaking as he lifted the carpet runner. What lay beneath wasn't rot. It was damage. Clean, deliberate saw cuts carved deep into the supporting beams. Precise. Fresh. "Someone cut these," he whispered. "Someone wanted you to fall." At that exact moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Kalen. "Mom, come downstairs now. I'm here. I understand everything." The house seemed to exhale, slow and heavy. In that instant, every unanswered question aligned. My son wasn't coming to help me. He was coming to watch the staircase, do the work for him. I didn't scream. I didn't call for help. Instead, I chose a way down the house that my son had forgotten existed, and that single decision saved my life. Fear is loud when it first arrives. It crashes into you, demanding panic, demanding noise. But once you move past that first wave, fear becomes something else entirely. It sharpens you. It strips away hesitation and leaves only choices. Jackson stood frozen at the foot of the staircase, waiting for me to react. I could see it in his eyes. He expected screams, maybe tears, maybe my legs giving out beneath me. Instead, I felt an unsettling calm settle over my shoulders, as if my body had already decided that survival was the only acceptable outcome. "Remove the carpet," I told him quietly. "Let the cuts stay visible." He blinked. "Addie, you need to leave. Call the police." "Not yet," I said. "Do exactly what I'm asking." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He nodded, rolled the runner fully aside, and exposed the wounded wood beneath. The staircase looked obscene without its covering, like a body stripped of clothing to reveal fresh scars. "Now take your tools," I continued. "Go into the library, lock the door, and don't come out until I call you, no matter what you hear." Jackson hesitated only a second before obeying. Heavy footsteps retreated, and the library door clicked shut. I stood alone at the top of the stairs, staring down at the trap meant for me. The distance to the bottom suddenly looked enormous. One wrong step, one moment of panic, and the house would have swallowed me whole. My phone vibrated again in my pocket, as if urging me forward. "Rush downstairs," Kaylin had written. "I'm here." I did not rush. Instead, I turned my back on the staircase. At the far end of the second-floor corridor stood a narrow door most people never noticed. It was disguised with the same wallpaper as the walls, its outline softened by decades of paint. Behind it lay the servant staircase, steep, cramped, and unfashionable. Kaylin hated it as a child. He complained it was too dark, too narrow, too insignificant. He preferred wide entrances and dramatic descents. That arrogance was now my lifeline. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old plaster and dust. The steps were simple pine, worn down the middle by generations of people who were never meant to be seen. I placed one hand against the wall and began my descent, counting each step to keep my breathing steady. 1, 2, 3. With every step downward, something inside me shifted. Memories rose uninvited, Kaylin as a toddler, his small hand gripping my finger, Kaylin as a teenager, slamming doors, Kaylin as a grown man, counting square footage instead of years. By the time I reached the bottom, the woman who believed motherhood guaranteed loyalty no longer existed. I emerged into a small pantry near the kitchen. The house was silent, waiting. I moved without hesitation. Panic wastes time, and time was the one thing I could not afford to lose. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. The click of the gas igniting sounded unnaturally loud. While the water heated, I took out my best porcelain, thin white cups edged with gold, saved for holidays. I placed 3 cups and saucers on a silver tray. 3. One for me. One for my son. And one for the truth that was about to reveal itself. When the kettle whistled, I poured the water carefully, steady-handed, then carried the tray into the front hall. I positioned my favorite high-backed chair so it faced the staircase, the very spot where my broken body should have been lying. Then I sat. I smoothed my skirt, rested my hands on the armrests, lifted my teacup. The front door burst, open seconds later. Kaylin rushed in, breathless, coat still open, phone clutched in his hand. His eyes swept the floor first, not searching for me, but for absence, for the result he expected. Confusion crossed his face when he found nothing. Then his gaze lifted. He saw the exposed staircase, the raw saw cuts gaping like open wounds. Finally, he saw me. I sat perfectly still, steam curling up from my cup like a signal fire. His body froze mid-step, as if he had run straight into an invisible wall. The expression on his face was not relief. It was terror. He had rehearsed screams, panic, maybe tears. He had not prepared for tea. "You're late," I said softly, meeting his eyes, "and you look upset." His mouth opened, Closed, opened again. No sound came out. In that moment, I understood something important. A person who believes they are unseen will do unspeakable things. But once exposed, they unravel quickly. And Kalen was already unraveling. Kalen tried to explain himself. His wife arrived to help. But a single object hidden upstairs would soon reveal just how long they had been planning my death. Kalen stood frozen in the hall, staring at me as if I were an illusion his mind had failed to prepare for. His breathing was shallow, uneven. I could see the frantic calculations behind his eyes, the mental scramble to rewrite the story before it slipped beyond his control. "Mom," he finally said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "You scared me, I thought." "Thought what?" I asked calmly, lifting my cup and taking a slow sip. The tea was hot, grounding, real. He didn't answer. He glanced again at the staircase, at the exposed cuts, then back to me. The truth hovered in the air between us, thick and undeniable. Before he could speak again, the sound of heels struck the front steps. Danica arrived 40 minutes later, precisely late enough to look concerned but not panicked. The front door swung open and she swept inside, perfume heavy and sweet, the kind meant to overwhelm rather than comfort. "Oh my God, Ariadne," she exclaimed, rushing toward me with arms half raised. "Kalen said there was an accident. Are you hurt?" Her eyes scanned me quickly, not with worry, but assessment. She was looking for bruises, for signs of weakness, for confirmation that something had gone wrong or perhaps had already gone right. "The stairs didn't collapse," I said quietly, pulling back from her attempted embrace. "They were cut." She froze for a fraction of a second, not long enough for Kalen to notice, but long enough for me. "Cut," she repeated, then turned sharply to her husband. "Kalen, what is she talking about?" Kalen moved fast, too fast. "She's in shock," he said. "The wood is old, you know how these houses are." Danica nodded immediately, slipping into place beside him like a well-practiced partner. "Exactly. Old structures can do strange things. Ariadne, you must be terrified." Terrified. The word almost made me smile. They spoke over me then, layering concern atop urgency. Hotels, doctors, safety. The house was dangerous, they said. I shouldn't stay here another night. Danica leaned closer, lowering her voice as if offering comfort. "We'll take you somewhere nice, just until things are sorted out." "And paperwork," Kalen added quickly. "Just temporary, a power of attorney so I can handle repairs without bothering you." There it was. I lowered my eyes, letting my shoulders sag. I allowed my voice to tremble just enough to convince them. "All right," I said softly. "I'll sign." Relief washed over Kalen's face so openly it almost embarrassed him. Danica squeezed my hand, her fingers cool and dry. "But not tonight," I continued. "Tomorrow evening, dinner, with everything done properly. I want the notary present." They exchanged a glance, quick, calculating, and then nodded. One day's delay was a small price for control. As they prepared to leave, Danica reached for her coat. "Oh," I said, as if remembering something. "Could you bring my bag from the guest room? It's already packed." "Of course," she said, turning down the hallway. The silence that followed stretched thin. Kalen busied himself with his phone, packing, already imagining money changing hands. Then Danica returned. Her hands were empty. "There's nothing there," she said sharply, her eyes locking onto mine. I studied her face carefully. The mask had slipped. Anger flickered beneath fear. "Nothing," I murmured. "Oh dear, I must be mistaken. Old age does that, you know." Danica said nothing. She couldn't. She had seen what was inside that room. The suitcase wasn't mine. It was hers. The day before, she had brought it with her, claiming it held old magazines for me. That morning, while Kalen was busy with the staircase, I had opened it. Inside lay a black wool dress. Severe, expensive, folded carefully. Beside it, a black veil. They hadn't hoped I would fall. They had planned for it. Danica couldn't tell Kalen what she'd seen without revealing too much. So she stayed silent, and we reached an unspoken agreement. They would pretend I was confused, and I would pretend I was fooled. They escorted me out of the house like a fragile package, never realizing I was the only one who truly understood what was happening. That night, in the unfamiliar sterility of the hotel room, I didn't sleep. Because now I knew something essential. This wasn't just greed. It was desperation. And desperation always leaves a paper trail. The next morning, I found the document my son never meant me to see, and it explained exactly why he was willing to kill for my house. Morning came without rest. The hotel room smelled of detergent and artificial flowers, a place designed to forget itself. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance from the night before. People believe betrayal announces itself loudly, but it doesn't. It reveals itself in small inconsistencies, in objects brought too early, in plans made too carefully. As soon as Kaylin and Danica left for what they called urgent business, I checked out. I wasn't going to rest. I was going to confirm. The brownstone was quiet when I returned, just as I expected. Kaylin believed I was safely tucked away in a hotel, compliant and frightened. He had always underestimated silence. I avoided the main staircase and used the servant stairs again, my hand brushing the wall the way one does in the dark, trusting memory more than sight. Upstairs, I went straight to Kaylin's old bedroom. He rarely stayed here now, but when he did, he used it like a storage unit for paperwork he didn't want his wife to see. Drawers half closed, bookshelves disturbed. I began methodically, not searching in a frenzy, searching the way an archivist searches, patient and precise. The books came first. Adventure novels he'd pretended to love as a child. Stories about honor, courage, loyalty. I almost laughed. He had memorized none of it. From the middle of a thick paperback, a folded sheet slipped free and fluttered to the floor. Not an envelope, not letterhead. Just plain paper. My hands did not shake as I unfolded it. $250,000. The number sat on the page like a verdict. The text was short, cold, typed without logos or signatures. A repayment deadline, a final notice, no courts, no negotiation. Failure to repay will result in physical liquidation of assets. I read it twice, then a third time. Physical liquidation. Not foreclosure, not lawsuits. This wasn't a bank. My son hadn't just made bad investments. He had borrowed money from people who don't wait politely. Everything snapped into focus with sickening clarity. The urgency, the pressure, the carefully timed staircase repair, the funeral clothes packed in advance. He wasn't killing me for comfort. He was killing me to survive. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. But the truth didn't stop there. My phone rang as I stood in the empty room. A landline number. I almost didn't answer. "This is Serenity Haven Assisted Living," a woman's voice said professionally. "We're calling to confirm arrival details for Ariadne Kimbrough." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Arrival?" I asked. "Yes," she continued. "Your daughter-in-law reserved an intensive care suite 2 days ago. She said transport would be required following discharge from the trauma unit." 2 days ago. Before Jackson ever lifted the carpet, before Kaylin texted me to rush downstairs. They hadn't just prepared for my fall. They had scheduled it. The woman hesitated on the line. "Should we still expect the ambulance this morning?" "No," I said evenly. "Cancel the reservation." I ended the call and sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. They hadn't planned to kill me outright. They planned to break me. A fall, a hospital, a facility where I would fade quietly while papers were signed and property transferred. A clean solution, minimal blood, maximum control. My son had not become reckless. He had become efficient. I stood and returned to the hallway, the house watching as I moved through it. In the workshop, something else caught my eye. A peg on the wall stood empty. My late husband's Japanese pull saw, razor-thin blade, precise enough to slice oak like paper, was missing. I found it outside, tossed carelessly behind the woodshed. Oak dust still clung to its teeth. Kalen hadn't just tried to kill me. He had used his father's tool to do it. That was the moment my fear finally turned into something colder. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was desecration. I returned to the dining room and began setting the table. White cloth, crystal, silver polished to a shine, everything exact. Because that evening, Kalen and Danica would return for dinner. They would come expecting signatures. Instead, they would face evidence. And they would learn something too late. When you try to erase history, history fights back. That night, they came for my signature, unaware that the house they meant to sell was never mine to give, and that the trap they set had already closed around them. The grandfather clock in the dining room struck 7, with a sound like a judge's gavel. Each slow chime echoed through the house, measured and deliberate, as if the walls themselves were counting down. I stood at the head of the table, smoothing the white tablecloth, aligning the silverware until everything was exactly where it belonged. Order matters when chaos is about to arrive. Kalen and Danica entered together, too composed for people claiming concern. Kalen adjusted his cuffs repeatedly, a nervous habit from childhood. Danica scanned the room the way a real estate agent surveys a property, calculating, detached. Miss Vance arrived last. She was small, gray-haired, and precise, carrying a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. She had handled my affairs for decades and understood discretion better than most people understood honesty. Dinner was served. They barely touched it. Kalen leaned forward before the soup cooled. "Mom, we should get this done while the notary is here. No reason to drag things out." Danica smiled thinly. "This is for your own good, Ariadne. You need rest, not responsibility." I lifted my spoon, tasted the soup, and nodded thoughtfully. "You're right," I said. "Responsibility can be exhausting." Kalen slid the folder across the table toward me and flipped it open to the marked page. The power of attorney waited there, neat and ready. A pen rolled to a stop beside my plate. "All you need is a signature," he said. "Then we can fix everything." I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I reached for my own folder, a thick leather one that Miss Vance placed beside me without comment. Kalen frowned. "What's that?" he asked. "Context," I replied. I opened the folder and removed a single document. Official, heavy paper, gold seal. "You can't sell this house, Kalen," I said calmly. Danica laughed sharply. "Of course he can. He's your son." I turned the paper so they could read it. 10 years ago, when the maintenance costs threatened to bury me and the taxes grew unbearable, I had made a decision they never bothered to ask about. I transferred ownership of the brownstone to a federal historical trust. I was no longer the owner. I was the lifetime curator. "This property belongs to the National Cultural Heritage Fund," I continued. "It cannot be sold, mortgaged, or seized for debt." The color drained from Kalen's face. He grabbed the document, scanning it wildly, searching for a loophole. Danica's smile collapsed into disbelief. "This isn't real," she whispered. "You lied to us." "I never lied," I said. "You never asked." Silence spread across the table like spilled ink. Kalen stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "The deposit," he said hoarsely. "I already took the deposit. They're coming." Danica looked at him sharply. "You said you handled it." "I thought I did," he snapped. "I thought she owned it." His voice cracked, panic breaking through. "If they don't get the house, they'll kill me." The words hung there, ugly and exposed. Kalen slammed his fist on the table. "Sign it anyway," he shouted. "Give me authority, we'll find a way." "There is no way," I replied quietly. He lunged toward me then, hands grabbing my shoulders, shaking me. "You have money. I know you do. Sell something. Save me." "Let go," I said evenly. Danica shrieked. "Do something. Fix this." In his rage, Kalen screamed words he couldn't take back. About burning the house, about insurance, about backup plans if the fall hadn't worked. The room went very still. Miss Vance stood. "I think that's enough," she said, raising her phone. Only then did Kaylin notice it. The call timer glowed on the screen. 42 minutes. Police sirens wailed in the distance. "You set me up," he whispered. "No," I said, standing at last. "You did that yourself." As the front door burst open and officers flooded the house, Kaylin made one final, desperate move and nearly turned confession into murder. Chaos does not arrive all at once. It leaks in, sound by sound, breath by breath. The first police siren wailed somewhere down the block, distant but unmistakable. Kaylin heard it at the same time I did. His eyes darted toward the windows, then to the front door, then finally back to me. He knew. Danica moved first. She backed away from the table, hands raised, voice trembling into something rehearsed. "This is a misunderstanding. Ariadne is confused. She's not well." Her words sounded practiced, but her eyes betrayed her. She was already calculating exits. Kaylin wasn't thinking anymore. "This isn't over," he hissed, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. "You think a piece of paper saves you." He reached into his jacket. For a moment, I wondered if he had brought a weapon. Instead, he pulled out his phone and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, plastic and glass raining onto the floor. He looked almost relieved by the destruction, as if breaking something proved he still had control. Then he grabbed the chair beside him and swung it violently toward the display cabinet. The crash echoed through the house as glass exploded outward. Porcelain shattered, heirlooms disintegrating into white dust. Generations of care reduced to fragments in seconds. I didn't flinch. That unsettled him more than screaming ever could. "You did this," he shouted. "You trapped me." "No," I replied. "I stopped you." The sirens grew louder. Doors slammed outside. Footsteps pounded up the front steps. Kaylin's gaze flicked again to the staircase. The main staircase. In one sudden, horrifying movement, he bolted. He sprinted toward the stairs, shoving past the officers just as they burst through the front door. His foot hit the damaged step. Wood cracked. His body pitched forward violently, arms flailing, momentum carrying him down. The sound his head made against the banister was sickening. He didn't fall the way I would have. He fell hard. Officers rushed forward, shouting for medics. Danica screamed his name, collapsing against the wall. I stood perfectly still, watching as they stabilized him on the floor he had meant for me. The irony did not escape anyone. Later, as paramedics wheeled him out on a stretcher, his eyes found mine. There was no hatred left in them. Only terror. Danica was escorted out in cuffs shortly after. The evidence was overwhelming: financial fraud, conspiracy, attempted homicide. She wept loudly, collapsing against the patrol car, demanding someone call her lawyer. The house grew quiet again once they were gone. Jackson emerged cautiously from the library, eyes wide. "Is it over?" I nodded. "Yes," I said, "for now." That night, I sat alone in the dining room amid broken glass and overturned chairs. I cleaned slowly, deliberately, honoring each piece as I set it aside. You can't rush healing. In the days that followed, I learned the full extent of Kaylin's debts: offshore lenders, false names, contracts written to disappear people, not properties. He survived the fall. Barely. The court ordered a psychological evaluation. The prosecutors were thorough. He would not walk free for a very long time. Danica tried to bargain. She offered names, accounts, explanations. None of it erased what she had packed into that suitcase. The house was repaired properly this time. Jackson replaced the damaged beams with reverence, treating the wood as if it could feel pain. And maybe it could. One afternoon, weeks later, I stood at the top of the staircase, looking down at the steps that had nearly ended everything. I placed my foot carefully on the repaired step. It held. The house had done its part. So had I. I believed the danger was finally over, until I received a letter from the people Kalen had borrowed from, addressed not to him, but to me. The envelope arrived without ceremony. No return address, no logo, just my name typed neatly across the front, the letters perfectly aligned as if measured with a ruler. It waited in my mailbox like a patient thing, unbothered by time or weather. I stood in the entryway for a long moment before opening it. Old instincts die hard. When you've spent a lifetime sorting records, you learn that the most dangerous documents rarely announce themselves. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no shouting, no dramatic language. Just facts. It acknowledged Kalen's accident, his current condition, his inability to repay his remaining balance. Then came the sentence that turned my blood cold. Responsibility for the outstanding obligation has transferred. Transferred. Not forgiven, not dismissed. Transferred. I sat down at the small writing desk near the window and read the letter again, slower this time. There was no mention of the house. They already knew it was untouchable. Someone had done their homework. Instead, the letter outlined alternatives. Assets. Information. Cooperation. They weren't asking for money. They were asking for leverage. The house creaked softly around me, a familiar sound, almost reassuring. I realized then that the threat had never truly left. It had only changed shape. That afternoon, I received a call from the district attorney. Kalen's condition had stabilized. He was conscious, talking, asking questions. Asking for me. I told them I would visit. Hospitals have a way of stripping people down to what they are. No titles, no pretense, just fragile bodies and quiet desperation. Kalen looked smaller in the hospital bed. Tubes ran from his arms. His leg was immobilized. The arrogance that once filled rooms had shrunk into something brittle and frightened. I didn't think they'd come to you, he whispered when I sat down. I did, I replied. You taught me how. Tears slid down his face. They said if I didn't fix it, you'd suffer. You already made that choice, I said gently. You just hoped I wouldn't notice. He closed his eyes, shame washing over his features. They're not done, he said. They won't stop. I know, I replied. That night, I reviewed my files. Not just legal documents, but personal ones. Notes, names, patterns I had collected quietly over the years. You don't work around powerful institutions without learning how influence truly moves. The people Kalen owed were careful, but not invisible. Every operation leaves residue. I began making calls the next morning. Former colleagues, old favors, quiet questions asked in careful ways. By the third day, a shape began to form not just of a lending group, but of the officials who shielded them. They weren't criminals in the way people imagine. They were respectable. That made them vulnerable. I sent my response by registered mail. It was brief. I acknowledged the transfer. I acknowledged their expectations. Then I included copies of 3 documents, enough to make their next move extremely dangerous. I did not threaten. I offered an exchange. Silence followed. Days passed. Then weeks. No calls, no letters, no visitors. The pressure eased not because they had lost interest, but because they had found a better target. Someone less prepared. One evening, I returned home to find the porch light glowing warmly against the dark. The house felt settled again, as if exhaling after holding its breath too long. I realized then that survival isn't about strength. It's about knowing which truths to reveal and which to keep in reserve. I thought I had finally closed the last file, until a stranger knocked on my door, claiming the house remembered something I didn't. The knock came just after dusk. Not loud, not urgent, 3 measured taps spaced carefully apart, the kind of knock meant to announce presence, not demand entry. I didn't answer immediately. The house shifted around me, a familiar settling of wood and stone, as if adjusting its posture. I stood in the parlor, listening, letting instinct catch up with sound. When the knock came again, identical in rhythm, I moved to the door and opened it. The man on the porch was tall, gray-haired, and impeccably dressed. Not expensive, intentional. He carried himself like someone used to being welcomed indoors. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said, offering a small smile. "I believe your house and I share a history." I didn't invite him in. "You'll have to be more specific," I replied. He nodded, unoffended. "Fair enough, may I come in?" I considered the house, the way the air felt, still balanced. "Yes," I said finally. We sat across from each other in the parlor. I poured tea, not as a performance this time, but as a habit. He accepted the cup without comment. "I represent a private historical recovery group," he said. "We investigate unresolved matters tied to protected properties." "Then you already know this house isn't for sale," I replied. He smiled faintly. "We're not interested in buying, we're interested in what was hidden." The word settled between us. Hidden. "This house," he continued, "was used briefly during the 1930s as a meeting site. Unofficial, unrecorded. Certain documents were believed to have been stored here for safekeeping." I felt something shift inside my chest. Not fear, recognition. "I've cataloged everything in this house," I said. "There's nothing like that here." "I believe you," Hale replied, "which is why I'm here." He placed a photograph on the table. It showed my dining room. Not recently. Decades ago. The furniture was different, but the architecture unmistakable. And on the wall behind the table, where a mirror now hung, there was a narrow wooden panel, one I had never noticed. "A false wall," Hale said quietly. "Removed sometime after the war, or so we thought." I stood slowly. The mirror. I crossed the room and lifted it from its hook. The wall behind it looked ordinary, too ordinary. I pressed my palm against the surface. It moved. Just slightly. The house hadn't forgotten. It had waited. Behind the panel lay a shallow cavity. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth darkened by age, were folders and a small metal box. Hale didn't touch them. "I'll leave you to it," he said, rising. "We only ask for copies." When he left, I sat on the floor and opened the folders with careful hands. Names, meetings, transfers, evidence of collaboration between powerful figures long thought untouchable. The metal box held microfilm, brittle, precious. I understood then why the house had never felt empty. It had been guarding something. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, I contacted the trust. The documents were authenticated. Their implications were enormous. Too enormous to bury. Within weeks, investigations began quietly, then loudly. Careers ended. Legacies crumbled. Truth resurfaced. No one connected it to me. They never do. The house returned to stillness, lighter now, as if relieved of a burden it had carried for nearly a century. I resumed my routines: tea, cataloging, care. Some histories demand witnesses. Others demand patience. I believed the house had finally given up all its secrets, until I realized one truth remained, and it concerned me alone. When everything finally quieted, I expected relief to arrive with it. Instead, what settled over the house was something more reflective. Not peace exactly, understanding. The investigations unfolded at a distance, like storms moving across another horizon. Names appeared in newspapers. Statements were issued. Apologies were made without meaning. The truth, once uncovered, behaved as it always does. It disrupted lives, then waited to be forgotten again. I stayed out of it. That was my role. The brownstone returned to its rhythms. Morning light through the east windows, the gentle complaint of pipes warming, the soft whisper of pages turning as I worked at my desk. The house no longer felt heavy. It felt finished. Kaylin was transferred to a long-term facility. I visited once. He looked older than his years, thinner, stripped of the confidence that had once filled him. We spoke politely, cautiously, like strangers who shared an uncomfortable memory. "I never meant for it to go that far," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, and I did. Intent does not absolve outcome. Danica took a plea deal. I never saw her again. I doubt she thinks of me often, except perhaps in the moments just before sleep, when regrets are loudest. The lenders disappeared from my life entirely. That was not mercy. It was calculation. They had learned something important, that some debts extract more than they repay. One afternoon, I stood once more at the top of the staircase, sunlight spilling down the steps. The repaired wood gleamed softly, indistinguishable from the rest. I placed my hand on the banister and closed my eyes. I thought about the woman I had been when I first moved into the house. Younger, more forgiving, certain that love could outweigh truth. The house had taught me otherwise. It had taught me that survival isn't about resisting change. It's about recognizing patterns early and acting before they harden. That evening, I completed the final entry in my catalog. Not a document, a decision. I notified the trust of my intention to step down as curator within the year. They protested gently, respectfully. I assured them I would assist in the transition. Guardianship, like everything else, must eventually be passed on. Before bed, I walked through each room, touching door frames, walls, the worn edge of the dining table. Not goodbye, acknowledgement. The house had done its duty. So had I. I slept with the windows open that night. The city breathed around me, alive and indifferent. For the first time, I did not feel the need to listen for creaks or warnings. The house no longer needed a sentinel. It would endure, as all honest things do. Some houses remember the people who tried to destroy them, and sometimes they wait for the right person to hear the story they were never meant to tell.